defied conventional physical description. It existed as a space between spaces, a dimension whose properties were fluid and responsive to consciousness itself. Within this malleable reality, the translated Firefly Mountain served as an anchor point, a relative constant in an ever-shifting landscape of possibility. The mountain, no longer bound by Earth's geological constraints, had transformed dramatically over the millennia. Its exterior retained a recognizable mountain form, though its proportions had grown more dramatic, soaring spires reaching toward an ever-changing sky filled with celestial phenomena unknown in conventional reality. The mountain's surface shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that shifted in response to the collective emotional state of its inhabitants, while gravity varied throughout its expanse, allowing for floating gardens and inverted waterfalls that flowed upward into cloud lakes suspended between peaks. Within the mountain, space expanded far beyond what its external dimensions would suggest possible. Vast chambers housed diverse ecosystems developed from the biological samples that had translated with the mountain. These had evolved along unique trajectories under the influence of the realm's malleable physical laws, producing flora and fauna unlike anything on Earth. Crystal trees with leaves that chimed melodically in dimensional currents, creatures of living light that fed on conceptual energy, fungi that grew in fractal patterns and produced spores capable of storing memories. The Omniones themselves had continued to evolve in this environment. The formerly awakened Saurians had long since transcended their reptilian origins, their consciousness expanding as their physical forms became increasingly malleable. They had organized themselves not according to hierarchy but through what they called resonance clusters, groups of individuals whose thought patterns naturally harmonized around particular aspects of existence. These clusters focused on different elements of Omnion society. The Weavers specialized in maintaining and expanding the consciousness corridors connecting the interstitial realm to Earth and other seeded worlds. They developed techniques for perceiving events across dimensional boundaries and, when necessary, subtly influencing them through carefully calibrated energetic transmissions. The Shapers focused on the physical aspects of the interstitial realm, learning to manipulate its malleable properties to create and maintain the habitats needed by the realm's diverse inhabitants. Their work required profound understanding of how intention and physical reality interacted in interstitial space. The Rememberers preserved the collective memory of the Omniones, maintaining unbroken awareness of their origins, evolution, and purpose. They existed in a state of perpetual communion with the accumulated experiences of all who had come before, serving as living archives of wisdom for the entire collective. The Seekers explored the furthest reaches of the interstitial realm, mapping its connections to other dimensions and establishing contact with other consciousness forms that existed between conventional realities. Their discoveries continuously expanded the Omni One's understanding of the cosmos and their place within it. Most enigmatic were the Dreamers, those who had evolved beyond even the expanded consciousness of their peers to exist primarily as patterns of pure thought, untethered from physical form except when they chose to manifest for direct communication with others. The Dreamers served as the Omni One's connection to the most abstract levels of reality, perceiving patterns and possibilities invisible even to their enlightened kin. Daily existence in the interstitial realm bore little resemblance to life as understood by physical beings. The Omniones required no sustenance in the conventional sense, drawing energy directly from the dimensional currents flowing through their realm. They experienced neither sleep nor wakefulness as distinct states, instead cycling through various levels of awareness that allowed different aspects of their consciousness to rest and replenish while others remained active. Communication occurred primarily through direct consciousness exchange, a sharing of thought, emotion, and experience that transcended linguistic limitations. When more structured communication was desired, particularly for interactions with beings less evolved than themselves, the Omniones could generate sensory representations, visible light patterns, harmonic sound sequences, or tactile energy fields that conveyed meaning through multiple channels simultaneously. Time flowed differently in the interstitial realm, its passage varying according to the density of consciousness in different regions. In areas of intense collective awareness, centuries might pass in what would be experienced as moments in conventional reality. Conversely, in regions where consciousness was more diffuse, a single thought might unfold over what would be perceived as years from an Earth perspective. This fluid temporality allowed the Omniones to maintain simultaneous awareness of multiple timescales, an ability crucial for their stewardship of consciousness evolution across dimensions. Through the consciousness corridors, they could observe Earth's development across geological eras while remaining responsive to momentary fluctuations in its energy field. The center of Omnion society was the Chamber of Confluence, a vast spherical space at the heart of the translated mountain where all consciousness corridors converged. Here, the boundaries between individual awareness blurred most completely, allowing the Omniones to function as a truly collective intelligence while retaining the unique perspectives of its constituent members. Within the chamber, the portion of Earth's energy grid that had translated with the mountain manifested as a luminous geodesic structure, a three-dimensional map of interconnected light lines representing the energy flows of their former home. This structure served as both navigation system and monitoring device, allowing the Omniones to track disturbances in Earth's consciousness field and direct their attention to areas requiring intervention or protection. For millions of years after their transition to the interstitial realm, the Omni-One's relationship with Earth remained primarily observational. They watched as mammals rose to prominence following the asteroid impact, as primates developed increasingly complex social structures, and as the first proto-human species emerged with neural systems capable of abstract thought. Throughout this period, they maintained particular focus on the dimensional lake that had replaced Firefly Mountain in conventional reality. This site remained the strongest connection point between Earth and the interstitial realm, a place where the boundaries between dimensions naturally thinned, allowing energy and, occasionally, consciousness itself to flow more freely between worlds. What the Omniones could not fully predict was how their own evolution in the interstitial realm would eventually influence Earth's development, or how the persistent threat posed by the remnants of the Saurian Empire would necessitate a more direct intervention in Earth's affairs than they had ever intended. Chapter in their interstitial sanctuary, they remained acutely aware of the threat that had driven them from conventional reality. The Saurian Empire, though devastated by the asteroid impact, had not been completely destroyed. In deep oceanic trenches, within hollow asteroids positioned in Earth's orbit, and in subterranean complexes shielded from the impact's effects, pockets of Saurian civilization endured, diminished but determined. Among these survivors, none were more persistent than the remnants of the Eternal Clutch. Though their flagship and most elite members had been lost during the confrontation at Firefly Mountain, the Clutch's extensive network had ensured that genetic templates and consciousness records of their leadership were preserved in multiple secure locations throughout the solar system. From these backups, a new generation of Eternal Clutch leadership eventually emerged, their predecessors. These reconstituted elites carried with them the institutional memory of their defeat at the mountain and an obsessive determination to locate the Omniones and reclaim what they perceived as stolen power. For millions of years following the cataclysm, as mammals rose to dominance on Earth's surface, the diminished Saurian factions conducted their search in secret. Their technology, though compromised by the asteroid impact's after effects, remained far more advanced than anything that would evolve naturally on Earth for eons to come. Using specialized sensors designed to detect dimensional anomalies, they established monitoring stations around the dimensional lake and at other sites where Earth's boundary with the interstitial realm was particularly thin. The Omniones observed these efforts through their consciousness corridors, recognizing the existential threat they represented. Should the Saurians succeed in establishing stable contact with the interstitial realm, they might eventually develop the capability to mount an invasion, one that could potentially destabilize not just the Omni-One's sanctuary but the delicate dimensional boundaries supporting multiple realities. This concern prompted the formation of a specialized Omnion cluster known as the Vigilance, individuals who devoted themselves entirely to monitoring Saurian activities and developing countermeasures against potential incursions. Unlike other clusters, the Vigilance maintained forms and thought patterns more closely resembling their original Saurian nature, believing this gave them insight into their adversaries' strategies and motivations. Presences, on Earth, projections of consciousness that could observe events in conventional reality without fully manifesting physically. These shadow presences concentrated particularly around Saurian monitoring stations, gathering intelligence on their technologies and intentions. What they discovered was deeply troubling. The reconstituted Eternal Clutch had developed an obsessive theology around their defeat at Firefly Mountain, interpreting it not as a natural consequence of attempting to suppress Earth's consciousness evolution but as a cosmic injustice perpetrated by reality itself. They believed that by reclaiming the mountain and the Omniones who had once been their kin, they could reverse their species' decline and restore their dominion over multiple dimensions. To this end, they had dedicated their limited remaining resources to the development of reality puncture technology, devices capable of temporarily breaching the boundaries between conventional space-time and the interstitial realm. Their initial attempts had been crude and largely unsuccessful, creating unstable microportals that collapsed almost immediately. But with each failure, their approach grew more sophisticated. The Vigilants calculated that within another million years of development, a mere moment in cosmic terms, the Saurians might succeed in creating a stable portal large enough to send through exploration and eventually invasion forces. This timeline coincided uncomfortably with projections for the emergence of fully self-aware consciousness among Earth's evolving primates, a critical developmental milestone the Omniones had been nurturing through subtle energetic influence. The convergence of these factors created what the Omniones recognized as a decision point, a moment when the trajectory of multiple interconnected systems would be determined by specific choices and interventions. After extended communion in the Chamber of Confluence, the collective reached consensus. More direct action would be required to protect both their realm and Earth's evolving consciousness. This decision represented a significant philosophical shift. Since their transformation and flight to the interstitial realm, the Omniones had embraced a principle of minimal interference, believing that consciousness evolved most authentically when allowed to follow its natural trajectory with only subtle guidance. Now, faced with the persistent Saurian threat, they recognized that sometimes protection required more deliberate intervention. The question became, what form should this intervention take? The Omniones possessed the collective power to simply eliminate the remaining Saurian presence on Earth through concentrated energy projection through the consciousness corridors. But such an action would violate their most fundamental ethical principles, particularly their belief in the potential for any consciousness, no matter how misaligned, to eventually achieve harmony with the greater cosmic pattern. Instead, they developed a multi-layered strategy that would simultaneously protect Earth's developing consciousness, contain the Saurian threat, and create conditions favorable for the next stage of consciousness evolution. This strategy centered on what they called the veiling, a deliberate reconfiguration of Earth's dimensional boundaries that would make detecting and accessing the interstitial realm significantly more difficult for technologically based approaches. Implementing the veiling would require a massive coordinated effort, drawing on the specialized abilities of all Omnion clusters. It would also necessitate fundamental changes to the consciousness corridors connecting their realm to Earth, changes that would limit their own ability to perceive and influence events in conventional reality. Most challenging of all, the veiling would require the Omniones to entrust Earth's future development to another cosmic force, one they had observed from afar but never directly engaged with. A civilization whose evolutionary path had taken them in a direction quite different from either the Saurians or the Omniones themselves, but whose ethical alignment suggested they might serve as suitable guardians during the critical period ahead. The time had come to contact the Pleiadians. Part 3. The Pleiadian Intervention Chapter 9. The Star Guardians in the star cluster known to future humans as the Pleiades. Consciousness had evolved along a path distinct from both the technologically oriented Saurians and the dimensionally transcendent Omniones. The Pleiadian civilization had developed what might be called a harmonic technology, a methodology that bridged the apparent gap between scientific advancement and spiritual development, treating both as complementary aspects of the same fundamental reality. Physically, Pleiadians resembled the humanoid form that would eventually evolve on Earth, though with subtle differences: taller stature, more luminous skin that seemed to radiate light from within, and eyes with expanded color perception that allowed them to directly observe energetic